Hello, and welcome to Piedmonsters, the Piedmont Pilot Podcast brought to you by your Piedmont MEC. I'm your host, Megan Johnson, member of the Communications Committee and First Officer based in Charlotte. This month, I'm joined by Captain Martin Ebert, chair of the ASAP Committee, and First Officer Ben Montgomery, member of the FOQA Committee. We'll be discussing how these two safety programs work and why they are so important to our daily operations here at Piedmont. Before we get into that, I do have some news and updates. Over the last couple weeks, Piedmont MEC and LEC representatives traveled to Chicago for an MEC meeting, as well as to join representatives from other ALPA carriers for ALPA's biannual Board of Directors meeting. These meetings are critical to open discussion across the industry. Delegates focused on strategic planning for the next 2 years, including topics like safety, government affairs, and communications. I was fortunate enough to meet with several key people, including ALPA President Captain Jason Ambrosi, and we'll have some special edition interviews being released soon. Your MEC and LECs are excited to announce we will be hosting Pilot Unity Building Pub events in both Philadelphia and Charlotte in December. On December 16th in Philadelphia and December 17th in Charlotte, we'll be hosting family-friendly events at Dave & Buster's. Partners and children are welcome. A $20 food and beverage credit will be available to each guest, and we will encourage families to join us even if your pilot is out flying. RSVPs will be required. More information to come. A reminder as we enter holiday season that Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day are our contractual holidays qualifying for holiday pay. However, if you're scheduled to fly those days but call in sick, holiday pay rates will not apply. As always, thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to Piedmonsters wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And follow us on Instagram at Piedmont Pilots. You can also email us at pdtpodcast@alpa.org with any comments or suggestions. And lastly, before we move into the interview with Ben and Martin, a legal and procedural clarification regarding ASAP reports. It is always the goal of this podcast, first and foremost, to provide accurate information to our pilot group. We want to be clear that if an event is only reported via ASAP and no other reports or information sharing is required, the ASAP report is accepted to the Event Review Committee, or ERC. That information is protected from the company, and the company will not have recourse to seek disciplinary action. These situations are considered sole source events. There are exceptions to this rule that would disqualify a pilot from protection, including intentional disregard for safety, criminal activity, drug or alcohol abuse, or intentional falsification. If, however, a pilot files an ASAP and that event is brought to the company's attention through other means, also known as a non-sole source event, the event may also be investigated by the company as required. FOM Section 23.3.1 explains the intention of the ASAP program is, quote, a non-disciplinary corrective action approach to flight safety, end quote. And Section 23.3.4 goes on to further reiterate the ERC corrective actions are designed to be non-punitive. As a union member, ALPA resources are always available. If you have any questions about the ASAP program, investigation process, or your protections as a pilot, please reach out to Martin or a member of the ASAP committee who can provide further clarification. And with all of that said, let's move on to our conversation with Martin and Ben about the ASAP and FOQA programs, respectively. Hello and welcome to Piedmonsters. Today I am lucky to be joined by two of our committee representatives, Ben Montgomery, representing the FOQA committee, and he is actually also one of our LEC reps up in Philly. And we're also joined by Martin Ebert, who is the chair of our safety committee and largely focuses on ASAP reports. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with me.
No problem. Thank you.
So we're just going to go ahead and jump right into things. If you could just give us a little bit of an introduction about yourselves, how you got involved with ALPA, and specifically your respective committees. Ben, if you could go first.
Yeah, so let's see, I'm a Harrisburg-based FO. Been working for Piedmont for about 2 years now. I got involved with ALPA work. So once I got off probation, I was very curious about how the union operated and what was going on, and someone suggested me to volunteer for the committee. And honestly, I think I lucked out in being contacted by the FOQA committee to start working with them. It's kind of like my first opportunity to get involved. And it's just been a fascinating job. I've learned a ton that's helped me, with my own flying, and just kind of get to see all the things that are going on with our operations, things that are affecting day-to-day stuff, what crews are sometimes challenged with, and then think about how to solve them. It's been a really great job.
Excellent. Thank you. And Martin, same question for you.
Yeah, so somewhat similarly to Ben, I actually first joined the committee, the ASAP committee itself, as an FO in Charlotte right out of probation. At the time I joined, that was one of the committees that they deeply needed help with. They did not have a lot of members, and I was very interested in safety. I definitely wanted to focus more on the safety aspect of the union than some of the other committees, so went to ASAP. I've been on it for 2.5 years now, became the chairman last year, and also vice chair of air safety, just kind of de facto. They pretty much all work together in concert, but very interested in the safety aspect and seeing the issues that face the pilot group, such as pilot deviations occurring at certain airports or things of that nature, so that we can figure out why they're occurring and what we can do to help the pilot group move forward from that and to keep it from occurring in the future. So that's the main goal of the ASAP itself, is to improve safety. And it's been really interesting to be a part of that and see where we're doing really well and maybe not doing so well.
Definitely. And I think we can all agree that obviously safety is always our number one priority. So definitely appreciate all the work that you guys do. So if you could tell us a little bit about specifically your committee, what it is, how it works, and your role as the representative in that space.
All right. I guess I'll get started off. So FOQA, that's the Flight Operations Quality Assurance Program. It's a program that's run jointly between the company and the union. So it's run by the safety department. And basically what FOQA is doing is it's looking at data that's collected from all the airplanes. So there's a recorder in every airplane, and it's several thousand parameters that it records every second. That gets downloaded by the company whenever the airplane gets to a maintenance overnight, and that information gets fed into a computer system that then analyzes that data looking for events. I'll talk about what an event is a little bit more later. If there is an event identified on a flight and the company wants to know more information about what was going on, so like we can see the data, like we know what the airplane was doing, but we'd like to understand what was going on with the crew. They'll ask for a crew contact. And that's where the union starts getting involved. We function as gatekeepers. Within the FOQA program, crews are anonymous. So the company can see the data that the airplane recorded, but they can't see who the crew was. They don't have any identifying information. So gatekeepers can see both of that. So those are all union members working on the FOQA committee. We'll take the information, obviously reach out to that crew. And we have a standard set of questions that we'll ask. Some of the events have questionnaires associated with them, but we'll reach out, ask the questions, find out what was going on. Anonymous information gets attached with the event in the system, and then that helps with the analysis. Say like, okay, well, we see this event occurring, I'll say more frequently this month than last month, and crews are telling us some new thing is happening. Maybe we had a procedure change or whatever. And they can use all that information to try to make the safety program better within the company. And the last thing I'd say about the FOQA program overall, from a crew perspective, you are anonymous. There's no punitive repercussions associated with a FOQA contact because the company doesn't know who you are. There's no tracking in the sense of like, from one event to another. Let's say a particular individual was involved in an event, more than once. There's no tracking to look for that kind of information or those kind of sequence of events, and everything's anonymous. So we are very deliberate within the gatekeepers about keeping information out of the write-ups that we do, to the point like we don't use pronouns. So it'll just say Captain FO, doesn't say anything he, her, or anything like that. And then talking to a FOQA gatekeeper is voluntary. So you could decide that you don't want to participate in the program and say no thank you. Obviously we prefer you don't, because we were definitely interested in getting information for the safety program at large, but it is a voluntary thing. So you're not required to answer a crew contact from a gatekeeper. So that's FOQA in a nutshell. And then, we could talk some more about the specifics of how the program works. Like we'll go into what events are and things like that.
Definitely. And just speaking to my own experience, Ben and I were talking about earlier that I have had exactly one run-in with the FOQA committee, and it was Ben Montgomery, and he contacted me my first day off of OE, and I could not imagine how I had gotten in trouble so quickly. I was like, this is a new record. I am clearly the worst pilot ever. I am getting fired. And it started with a text. Hey, this is Ben Montgomery with the FOQA committee. And if you would like, if you could please give me a call, we just want to talk. But it was very much set up as something that this is optional. You are not required to participate. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear more details. But it was very much set up as something that was voluntary, not required. And then the conversation was really straightforward and easy. It was, were you operating this flight?
Low threat conversation, right?
Low threat conversation.
Yeah.
And so it just was really quickly, were you operating this flight? What happened? Oh, you were on OE. I'm just going to mark this down as a training flight. And none of it actually, this is all completely anyway.
Yeah. And just so it's said, I mean, generally for training flights, so if a pilot doing OE, there's an event on that flight, we generally don't do crew contacts for those. It's not really fair. So, sometimes there's issues with the database. So that information, who the crew was, getting linked up with the actual data, sometimes that doesn't go 100% and it's not marked as a training flight, get a call. Fortunately, that happened to you.
Yes. So I just would like to reassure the pilots out there that it can be scary at first, but it is not a scary process. And it is worth it to just go ahead and participate. And I promise no one is coming after you, and you will not get fired over a FOQA call.
Yep. That's a fact.
You won't get fired over ASAPs either, so there's nothing to be concerned.
Good to know, which brings us to the ASAP program and how it works, what it is, and Martin, your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So ASAP, or Aviation Safety Action Program, is a joint venture between the company, the union, and the FAA. So we do have a lot more personal involvement from the FAA with ASAP, as there are designated FAA inspectors who work with every airline on their action program. Basically, it revolves around reporting events. There's no automated collection or anything like FOQA has, which I think is probably the biggest difference. It does revolve around pilots actually filing reports so that we can see the data. There are times that the company is made aware, or the FAA is made aware of instances such as pilot deviations and things like that, where they will reach out to the pilot and say, hey, let's file a report on this, things like that. So you are given that benefit of the doubt in that certain circumstance. But basically how it works is the reports are entered in the system. The company participates in the program in two pieces. The safety department is the administrator of all the reports. They run the program. They have no say on the reports. They simply put them in the system, organize them, set up the meetings, that kind of stuff, all of the admin work. The other representative of the company is right now the program manager's office. So the program manager and the assistant program manager, they participate in the event review committee meetings, which are monthly meetings where we actually go over all the reports. And the reason for that is part of the MOU, a memorandum of understanding for ASAP, is that nobody involved from the company can have disciplinary ability of pilots. It has to be a non-disciplinary position through the company, that kind of stuff. So we use the program manager. They're not involved. They're much more on the tech ops side. They know the manuals really well. They're the ones that revise the manuals, checklists, things like that. So we utilize them. We have a great relationship with them on the union. And then the FAA member, who right now is down in Florida, he's one of the inspectors on the certificate management team. We have a single member from the FAA, so very familiar with the airline, very familiar with our procedures, which is really good because it allows us to actually review and understand what was going on. And when he gets reports from, say, for the example of a pilot deviation, he typically can even reach out to me and sometimes process it and say, hey, there's a report in the system. Yeah, and it goes no further, which is the true issue of ASAP. It's to protect you from FAA action.
So just to clarify, if the report is a non-sole source report, meaning that the company found out about it in a way other than through ASAP, they could still do a parallel investigation. You may still have to talk to the company, but you shouldn't be disciplined.
I would say that 99% of the time, you're never, ever, ever going to hear anything from the company, and they do not have access to the ASAP reports themselves. So it's really only when there's some sort of other understanding that the company can investigate it, such as events that we've all heard about, like Rochester, where we exited the taxiway. They're going to run an investigation on that because they have an internal need to do so, and it's separate from what we do on ASAP. Again,
right.
Most of our point is to protect from FAA action. But basically, the reports are looked at 2 to 3 meetings a month. We review them. They're confidential, just like FOQA. No names. The names, if there are names in the actual write-up where people forget and type out names or things like that, they're redacted prior to the meeting. So we
Okay.
go over them. All we see is the flight information. We see things such as time of day, city pairing, pilot flying, pilot monitoring, and was it OE or not. So we get all that data. Then it's the narratives and what occurred, and basically make a decision as to, do we close it? Do we not accept the report, which is, in my tenure, has never been done. And I think the FAA inspector said he's been working with Piedmont for 10 years and it's only been done once. It's basically got to be the big five, which we can talk about later, to not accept the report and release you from protection. Or we can move forward with some corrective actions through the program, which are all also confidential, protected, similar to a crew contact from a FOQA gatekeeper. We have peer councils from the union members. We have lessons learned where you might do a write-up. A lot of those safety awarenesses that have been coming out recently are coming out of ASAP reports, where the pilots actually write a lot of that information up themselves from their recollection, even up into a potential sim session or ground training session. However, it's not a training record session. It's protected by ASAP. It's listed as other non-punitive training. It's not pilot records discoverable, and never have to talk about it in an interview or anything like that. But we do have a little bit more avenues through ASAP because of the fact that the FAA is directly involved, and they're working with the airlines themselves to try to encourage safety. So it's a little bit more varied in what we can do with the report somewhat, but that's also, I'm swinging to the very rare instance of those types of things. Most times you're going to hear accept close and never hear another word about your report.
That makes sense. The way it's always been described to me is basically, you admit that you've done something wrong and you admit that you know that it was a mistake and you're going to do better, so that way the FAA doesn't have to.
It's basically a specific airline program that mimics the NASA reports in general aviation.
Yep.
That's really where it comes from. Whereas NASA reports, we flight instructors, we all talked about file a NASA report, that's your get out of jail free card from the FAA. For lack of a better term, that's what ASAP is for an airline pilot. It covers you on the FAA and the big five, just to throw it out there. You showed up to work drunk and then filed an ASAP, you're probably not going to receive the protection of ASAP.
That's fair. That's a bad one.
Deliberately lied in the report and it can be it's proven, that kind of stuff. So again, it's not like, hey, you made a pretty big mistake, but it's okay. That's not going to get your report not accepted. It's pretty brutal to have the report not accepted. So it's got to meet a high barrier there.
Got it. Well, that kind of brings us to my next question is, what are things that, if they happen in flight, should trigger a pilot to automatically think that that's an ASAP I need to file, or vice versa for FOQA? What are things that are going to trigger a FOQA incident that are probably going to lead to you getting a phone call? And if you think one, should you do the other? Like, if I do something that I think is going to trigger a FOQA, should I automatically file an ASAP, vice versa? Kind of, how does that all work? What are the things that I should be looking out for?
I mean, from the FOQA side, the number of events that could trigger a FOQA, a crew contact, there's a lot of them. There's hundreds of them. I mean, just briefly, like an event. So I mentioned that the airplane is collecting a lot of data. It's a lot of parameters. I mean, you can imagine any piece of information that is visible to us as crew in the airplane is being recorded. Things, and also things that are not visible. There's some accelerometer variables that we can't see that the computer can record. There's actually 4 sensors on the controls. So if you push on the yoke at all, that's being recorded by the computer. And there's a display for what that looks like that honestly I can look at and say, like, hey, I think the captain was flying, or I think the FO was flying.
Right.
So there's a lot of information that the airplane records. That goes into a computer called Aerobytes the company maintains. And it has all of these events configured there. And it's looking for a parameter. So I'll just give you an example of one that I just pulled out. So the event is called approach speed high less than 50 feet. And what the computer's looking at is what the crew set as VREF. So what you put in that bug, what your actual airspeed is, and what the radial altimeter is showing. And it starts running the analysis when the radial altimeter is 50 feet, and it continues running it up until the airplane says it's on the ground. So the mains are on, basically.
Seems reasonable.
Yep. So it's looking at the airspeed, and the airspeed has to see an airspeed that exceeds your VREF for at least 3 seconds, and then it has 3 thresholds that will generate an event. It's at 10, 15, and 20 knots. So if you're 10 knots over ref for more than 3 seconds, below 50 feet on the RA until touchdown, you're going to get, that's called a minor event.
Okay.
Then there's a major event, and then there's a critical event. So minor being 10 over, 15 is major, and then 20 over is critical. So then those will get flagged in the data. And so I mean, 20 knots over VREF at, over the threshold is unstable
variance
for
and
our
extra.
criteria, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to generate the events. The company will see that, and they'll say, hey, we want to do a crew contact that will result in us calling that crew and saying, hey, this is the event that happened. This is what we see in the data. So I see your airspeed at whatever value over the threshold or at 50 feet on the RA. What was happening? And actually, for that specific event, we have a set questionnaire that we fill out, and that has like who was flying the airplane. What was the BREF that you set? Did you consider doing a go around? We're always going to recommend that you file an ASAP or something like that, because that's an exceedance. I mean, it's outside of the SOP. Any other information that crew wants to provide, and that's going to go into the system. So, and that's just one event. There's pretty much any time you have an exceedance. So any kind of flap or gear exceedance is going to generate events. There's events looking at for things that are unstable at various different altitudes from 1,000 foot down to the ground. So, if you exceed the vertical speed requirements or, airspeed requirements of being on a stable approach, there's events for those. So, anytime you have any type of exceedance, definitely going to get a FOQA event for that. And it's always worth filing an ASAP. The gatekeeper should remind somebody during a FOQA crew contact that, hey, an ASAP would be warranted here.
Yeah. Along the same vein, so I think it's important to point out too, and it may have been mentioned, I apologize if it has. FOQA and ASAP at Piedmont are not cross-talking programs. So we do not share any information with FOQA. They do not share any information with us. That is not necessarily the standard at all airlines. It is just we do not have an agreement at the time to share information. We've looked at potentially adopting one with air safety for very specific circumstances. A main concern from the union aspect and everything is the company weaponizing FOQA data against pilots and their ASAP reports and saying, well, I know you said this, but this is what the data shows, so you're things like that. Obviously, I will say, let me reiterate, we have a very good relationship with the company when it comes to ASAP. I do not believe that the current people involved would do that, but you always are looking for that worst case scenario down the line of two new people have taken the position and things like that. So as it stands right now, we don't have it, and there's no malicious intent from the company to do that. But that's part of the reason we don't do it right now. So
and you can it's also possible to get a phone call from both committees. So
it absolutely
I've done crew contacts where like, well, you just talked to me yesterday. I'm like, well, no, we didn't. Who did you actually talk to? And it's because they're talking to their committee.
My contact is typically about 4 weeks after the FOQA contact because it takes so much longer to roll through the ASAP program than it does FOQA. And they're like, we have already, and I'm like, no, this is now your ASAP. It's the same thing, Ben. So, but basically, when it comes down to ASAPs, yes, certainly I would reiterate, if you do get a FOQA contact, it's very advisable to go ahead and file an ASAP because most likely you've exceeded an airframe limitation or an SOP or things like that. And it's better just to cover yourself for it. When we talk about reporting, we look at the FOM. We have a chapter on reporting, and there is a list of required reports. One of the things that we're struggling with as we go through the ASAP issues right now are what is the difference in an incident report and an ASAP. The incident reports are the required reports in the FOM. Okay. So the incident reports are reports to the company that the company wants to know about. And that's that whole big list in the FOM of we hit a bird. The GPU didn't work at this gate. Hey, I had a drunk passenger and we removed him. The gate agent took care of it. All that kind of stuff. Where ASAP comes in, I like to tell people is, did it involve potential FAA action? Or is it a situation where you're concerned you maybe missed a step or didn't do something and you're a little worried? Will it ease your mind to file an ASAP? And at that point, I would say, go ahead and double file it. So even if you file an ASAP and an incident, which you technically should do if it is one of the required reports, because satisfying the requirement is filing the incident, not the ASAP, the company no longer sees that. So the chief pilot's office does process some incident reports, but if it is co-located with an ASAP, they do not look at it because they're not allowed to. They don't even look at the incident report. They're not allowed to. So, yeah. So basically with ASAP reports, let's say you got a FOQA call or, hey, ATC said something or questioned you on the radio and you guys thought you were doing the right turn, or maybe they were confused about the instruction and you're sitting here going, oh, they didn't say anything. They didn't give us a phone number. Did we mess up? Is something going to happen? File an ASAP. It covers you. If it does pop up 3 months down the road, you've already got a report in there. It takes care of it. It's that type of that type of items. Also, any other safety concerns. It's not just if you guys messed up. Is there concerns on the ramp in Charlotte? Every day. I'm based in Charlotte. It's a nightmare. Ground controllers, ramp controllers, all kinds of stuff. System malfunctions that you're concerned about. QRH procedures. This is where the company gets the meat of its data to look at our procedures and policies and whether or not they're working. So a lot of times when QRHs are reviewed, it's because of an ASAP on an event where the QRH was utilized, and they can see that, hey, maybe this procedure is not written well and it's confusing our crew. Because how often do we run QRHs? It's not that often. And there's probably procedures in there that you never even looked at. And
Absolutely.
so it's what we're allowed to do. So ASAPs are much more, it's a voluntary program, just kind of like talking to the FOQA gatekeepers. File the report if you need to. I always err on the side of saying, put it in the system. Doesn't hurt to file an ASAP. It's not like you've got 50 in your tenure at Piedmont and you don't want to use them up. It's an unlimited thing. The greatest example of drawing the distinction between incidents and ASAPs is, let's say you hit a bird going into Pit Greenville. You see it, you do the write-up, it gets inspected. You checked all the boxes there. That is a required report to the company because they want to know where bird strikes are occurring and what's happening. But you did everything you're supposed to do as a crew. You saw it, you filed, you did the write-up, you got it clean and everything like that. There's really no reason to file an ASAP for that, if that makes sense, because you did everything there. There's no question in that. Perfectly legitimate to still do the ASAP. But that's kind of the distinction between required incident reports and ASAP reports. So ASAPs are when you really have a question on something, or you think that there may be somebody questioning what you did.
Got it. Like I said, just a little indication that you have some self-awareness. Like, I know that something really, here is just not quite right.
And even then, I mean, if you declare an emergency or anything like that on the radio, probably file an ASAP because declare, there's other people listening. ATC may audit the records 3 months down the road and say, hey, what happened here? We'd like to look at it. If the ASAP is already taken care of, you're never going to hear anything about it. The information's already there. So it's just be cognizant of what's happening. And it's not telling on yourself. It's making sure that the information gets to the right people.
Right.
Which is, that's the big thing is people see ASAP as telling on themselves.
Right. So it's really just your chance to tell your side of the story, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Get your information in there before somebody else does.
I have one more thing on events, if you don't mind. Flip it back on real quick. I forgot to mention earlier. People get really curious and they want to see what all the possible events are.
It's me. I would like to know.
There's quite a few. If you go into comply, it's under the safety folder. There's a document in there called the FOQA INO Aviation 6. So if you open that document, you can see every single event the computer is looking for, as well as all the thresholds, what values it's looking at, and then what the thresholds are to trigger the event at the different level.
I utilize that chart quite often.
I didn't know that was there. I will absolutely go check that out. In my own
flying.
So then, Martin, you talked about the difference between an incident report and an ASAP. An incident report is required under certain things. Does the company get notified when a pilot submits an ASAP? Or what is the notification process there?
Yes. So basically, this is where it gets interesting because, yes, technically speaking, the company is aware because it goes to the safety department, which is part of the company. However, I think when most people are asking this, they're asking, does the chief pilot's office know? Is somebody that's going to get me in trouble find out about this?
Are you telling my boss?
Yeah, exactly. And so that does not happen. And the program manager's office does not see the reports until they're put into the meeting, redacted and prepared for every meeting. So the company is aware that something happened, but it's an area of the company bound by confidentiality and protected from any sort of disciplinary action. It's not like training doesn't get them until after the fact where we say, hey, similar to FOQA would say, hey, we're seeing a lot of flat speeds. And this is data that we're seeing as to why they're occurring. We might send that to training, but it's not like there's an email listserv where, hey, we've got another ASAP report. Here's all the information on it. It's a very controlled conduit where people can't see it. So they are put into NLX, and the arbiters of NLX is the safety department. So they are aware of it, but it's not disseminated to more than about 4 people in the safety department.
Okay. And then is there what kind of follow-up can a pilot expect to receive after they follow an ASAP? What kind of like update system or notifications can they expect to receive?
So that's definitely one side that we're trying to clean up right now. Typically, you got that random closure message out of NLX, and it's even hard to figure out what report you filed and what's being closed. So we're trying to clean that up to where, at minimum, the very basic message would be an accept close, which is the base rate closure message. So you get it saying, hey, it was reviewed by the review committee. You're going to get it's going to be closed out, nothing further, no further action, things like that. The next step is really similar to a crew contact by FOQA. It's what's called a peer control. Basically, one of the ASAP committee members is going to be reaching out to the crew and saying, hey, we looked at the ASAP. This is what occurred. Anything else for you to add? Do you have any other information that maybe wasn't in your ASAP? Maybe let's talk about root cause, why it occurred, things like that. A lot of times, some people, after the fact, when you start talking to them, they go, oh, that's true. ATC was talking to us at that point, and I think we were a little distracted, things like that. And it's really, again, very low threat conversation. It's not meant to be a hand slap or any sort of, I'm better than you and you didn't do good and this is why I'm calling. It's also for me and my committee members to report back and say, hey, here's a little more information. This is what we talked about. Sometimes people are confused on procedure and they put that in the ASAP. So we will do a follow-up with a peer counsel and say, here's where your confusion lies. This is what we determined was the proper course. What do you think about that? Do you agree, disagree, things like that? Because there are gray areas in the manual. And then again, like I mentioned, you could go on into training actions, lessons learned, statements, things like that. That's typically reserved for more serious ones where you've seen we have some stick shaker events in the past year or two. We have typically done some training events on stick shakers, but we've also had stick shakers that we've accepted and closed. Because sometimes stick shakers happen and the crew reacts how they're supposed to. And not to imply that anyone has done anything wrong, in quotations, but there runs a full spectrum here of what we're looking at. So it really depends. Now, one of the differences I will draw at this point for follow-up actions is major difference between FOQA and ASAP is ASAP can track priors. So in terms of prior events, we do not track individual pilots. The safety department can say, we are allowed to ask the safety department, the administrators, hey, has this pilot filed a limitation exceedance in the last year? Because this is a limitation exceedance. And they can say, yes, there was an ASAP for a limitation exceedance within the last 12 months from this same pilot. We do not know who they are or anything like that. What we're looking at there is, did we do anything with that prior report? Was any corrective action taken? Anything like that? Because if we have another one within a certain amount of time, maybe what we're doing isn't the right way to handle the issue, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So if we accept, it basically might step up the ladder of corrective actions. An accept close might go to a peer counsel if it's occurring within a certain amount of time. And it's very limited by the MOU and the advisory circular that controls the ASAP. So it's within 12 months, it has to be the exact similar issue. You can't say, well, they filed one for a safety concern, and now this one's a drunk passenger. That's not a prior. It would have to be, the best example is 2 limitation exceedances within a certain amount of time, 3 limitation exceedances within a certain amount of time. So that might increase the level of your corrective action, but it's not necessarily indicative that you're being punished. It's whatever the program is doing doesn't seem to be working, so let's try something different, because the whole goal is to stop these from happening and increase safety.
Seems reasonable. And then
on that prior conversation with FOQA has no mechanism to track prior events or repeat events or anything like that. That doesn't exist within the FOQA program. I mean, it is possible if the same gatekeeper was talking to the same person, I might remember that contact and hey, I already talked to you about this before, but I wouldn't personally bring that up, and I don't think the other gatekeepers would. We would focus on the specific event that we're calling that person for.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, Martin, you mentioned the Intellex app or website. Is that the best way to submit an ASAP report?
So that's the only way to submit an ASAP report.
Oh, well, there we go.
That is the only mechanism, both now to do incident reports and ASAP reports.
Okay.
For submitting the reports, I think the app is probably a better way to do it because it's a little bit more walks you through type atmosphere. There is a weird section where once you do a detail and try to submit, it's going to look like everything is taken care of. And then it's going to say, no, you're not done. You have to go back and do sub detail, but it just clicks through the process. Whereas the Intellex website has a little bit more functionality. I would say if you are curious about a prior report that you have filed, go to the website, because you're going to be able to see all of the reports that you have filed through the website. You can see the status of them in the program. Accepted, pending, all that kind of stuff. So for filing the reports, I would use the app. I think it's much more user-friendly than the website itself, and it leads you through it better. But that is the only way to file an ASAP.
Good. So if you don't have the Intelix app on your phone, might I recommend downloading it? Is incredibly helpful. I think it comes preloaded on the iPads.
Yeah, they're preloaded on the EFB. So I typically do them as quickly as I can now. So actually just thought of something to talk about reporting itself using the app. The FOM states there's 24-hour requirement to file a report. That is technically speaking an incident report requirement, either 24 hours of knowledge of the event or the conclusion of the trip sequence.
Okay.
ASAP removed the timeliness filing requirement from the advisory circular on the last update. However, Piedmont still would like you to file the reports as quickly as possible. And that's more an efficiency thing. We're trying to move through the program as quick as we can and deal with the reports. We get a lot of reports, nearly 1,000 a quarter. So, yeah.
I would imagine the quickness with which it's reported to probably would help the reporting pilot also have the best memory and the best accuracy of the details of the event.
Absolutely. That was
with
my
anything,
next point,
the
further
we get from something, the fuzzier the details become. So
yeah, and I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm like, I need to do an ASAP for that. I finish the trip and I go home and I start playing with the dog, watching TV, and then 2 days later, I'm like, I need to file that.
Right.
So in that, you're not going to be punished for a lack of time limit. It's a requirement, and try to adhere to it as much as you can. But we're
better
not
to file it late and not to file it at all.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not going to get it not accepted because of the time limit.
Excellent. So as far as the timeline of it all, we talked about, obviously, we want to file ASAP reports as quickly as possible, and then you guys work through the details, and usually it gets closed out fairly quickly. But for a FOQA event, how long after an event, Ben, can a pilot expect to be notified? What does that timeline tend to look like?
That's variable. It's hard to give a specific number of days because there's a lot of things that go into whether a crew contact is going to occur or not. So first one being the airplane has to make it to a maintenance overnight where they download the data. So it's not like some airlines, you have like Wi-Fi on board the aircraft. That data's immediately
What's that like?
Downloaded. Yeah, right. But for our airplanes, obviously we don't have that. So somebody has to go plug a cable in and actually copy that stuff off on a laptop. So that has to happen. And some of the airplanes have actually limited amounts of memory. So the airplane doesn't make it to an overnight where they download the data. It gets overwritten. So not every single, so it's not every flight that we operate is analyzed through FOQA.
Is there a standard amount of time? Like, for example, our CVRs obviously have a set amount of time that they record for. Is FOQA the same way, or does it just vary? My
understanding, it's kind of dependent on tail number. There's 2 different data recorders in the fleets. There's a newer data recorder that is its capacity is pretty large. It's pretty hard for an airplane not to get to a maintenance base before it runs out of space.
Right.
And then some of the older data recorders, they just don't have it past. It's only a couple hours. We would pretty much go through that fairly quickly. But I think we're hovering somewhere in the 80 to 85% of flights have their data analyzed. So something might happen on a flight. Like if you had an exceedance on, you should do the ASAP. FOQA may not see it because the data just never gets to the system. So that's one variable. Another one is, even though the computer looks at it and says, hey, there's an event here, we still have a human that's going to look at it. So somebody in the safety department still has to look at the information and decide, like, yep, that's an event we want a crew contact for, and give it to the gatekeepers to actually do the event. I say the last variable is the gatekeepers themselves, because we're all line pilots. So we're busy doing stuff. So it might be a couple days until somebody has a chance to get to that and go through it. To finish up the thought, I kind of went through 3 different factors. The other thing is the timeliness of the contacts themselves. I think all the gatekeepers, when timelines start to draw up, if I look at an event that was, say, more than a week ago, I'm already not expecting to get a lot of information out of that crew. And I will typically tell them, like, hey, I would have a tough time remembering specific details about something I did a week ago or 2 weeks ago, or I've seen a month ago. Like, I would personally have a hard time remembering that stuff, especially if it wasn't something that made me concerned. Like, I viewed the operation as normal. I would have a tough time remembering it. I don't think it's reasonable to expect anybody else working for the company to have a better memory than a gatekeeper or, anything like that. So if it's a really old crew contact, which does the variety of reasons we just talked about, I will tell people, it's like, hey, just if you don't remember anything, that's great. If you got in your logbook and you can at least look up some basic information about like, hey, who was pilot flying, that would be super helpful. At least it gets us some information for the event. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you just can't remember anything. Like, that's fine. I have no problem writing in the event like, hey, this one's old.
Yeah, the time you contacted me, it had been a few weeks. And you're like, did you operate flight such and such or this date to this airport? And I was like, I have no idea. And I pulled up my logbook and I was like, yes, that was my literal first flight of OE. And I was like, so I do actually remember it quite vividly. And I was able to go from there. But yeah, that was when you first asked me. I was like, I had no idea what I was doing that day. But yeah, to go back in the records definitely helps. So if you are contacted by FOQA, be prepared for that.
Most times you're going to talk to the ASAP committee members. It's probably something that did stand out and did imprint, because if we're contacting you, it's probably a more severe event.
Right.
But we still try to do it. I mean, we can hold interviews with the ERC, which we typically do for level 2s, which basically amounts to an in-person ASAP report similar to this. It's a Teams meeting call, no cameras. We just want the ability for the pilot in their own words to tell what happened instead of having to type it all up on top of that. And then we can ask follow-up questions, because sometimes the company has specific questions on events like engine shutdown, stick shakers, wind shears, things like that. But we try to do those as quickly as possible, because even those type of events, you get a wind shear warning or you can shut down an engine. Within 2 weeks, you're forgetting minor detail that might be important for certain things. Expediency is important, but the same way, if it's been more than a couple of months, when I call people, I'm like, hey, you listed a flat 9 overspeed, just checklist discipline, call ATC back, that kind of stuff. Typical scenarios based on the narrative. So it's very difficult. Nobody's thinking less of you if you can't remember it. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. So it's fine. When we fly as much as we do, it's not going to happen.
Definitely. Okay, so basically with FOQA, the contact could vary, but obviously you guys are trying to get to it as quickly as possible. But you're all active line pilots who are very busy. All of this is additional volunteer work that you guys are doing on top of it. So we get to it when we get to it, but we do appreciate all of the extra time and effort and energy that is put into it by both of your respective committees. So then we've talked about how obviously FOQA data is recorded automatically from the aircraft. ASAP is something that's self-reported by the pilots. And we talked about it a little bit, but what are the challenges of basically convincing pilots to self-report through the ASAP program?
Mentioned earlier the feeling of, or the notion and attitude of telling on yourself. Whereas, hey, we haven't heard anything about it. We got away with that one. You don't know that you did. You don't always know, especially in today's day and age of technological ability to record and then go back and look at things, as to who is aware of stuff. So simply thinking you got away with something isn't necessarily mean that you're safe. And so it's always better to go ahead and report. And again, nothing bad comes from filing an ASAP. It only good. Protection from the program and things like that. So it's not like you're going to open yourself up to. We try to make it as positive an experience. I know you don't want to talk to us on the phone and you don't want yourself scrutinized and things like that. I fully understand that. We're pilots. We all have egos. We don't want to be analyzed and things like that. And we don't like being looked at. But again, it's not about the individual as much as it's about the greater good for the pilot group. So the biggest challenge is trying to convince people that the program, one, works, and two, that it's not a detrimental thing to file a report.
Definitely. And then is there a standard procedure or a best practice of that discussion amongst two crew members? So if, let's say, one crew member wants to file an ASAP or says they think they should file an ASAP and the other one doesn't, or vice versa. I mean, obviously, if you think you should file an ASAP, you should file an ASAP, and you can't control what the other crew member does. But I would imagine that there's at least a standard of letting the other crew member know and some level of discussion before you take that action.
I think if there's good CRM between the crew members, there is. So in terms of the program itself, there is no standard for that. If you feel the need to file an ASAP report, file it. We will handle the other pilot at that point in time. Typically, just as an example, a lot of times where you see this issue is FO thinking they need to file an ASAP, captain brushing it off. No, we're fine. And then we end up having to reach out and then solicit a report from the captain saying, hey, look, we're just trying to get another point of view. That doesn't always happen. Don't always get the second report. Doesn't mean we can't handle the single report and disseminate the information and handle it as well we can. It is annoying to have to solicit one from a pilot multiple times, but that, again, it's a voluntary program. We're not going to hold your hand overall. We're not going to call you 9 times trying to get a report in the system. If you feel it's not necessary, you feel it's not necessary. But at the end of the day, if you personally feel that a report needs to be filed, don't let another pilot telling you it doesn't need to stop you from filing the report. File the report, because at the end of the day, it's your certificate on the line. Even if you were pilot monitoring and not pilot flying, you're still an active crew member of that aircraft, and any sort of action by the FAA against that aircraft is going to involve both the pilots. And we have seen one where there was a deviation filed and the FO got a report in, the captain didn't. Luckily, the FAA was open to allowing the captain to later submit a report. We were able to handle that well, and nothing came about it. Everybody went along their merry way, all good. But the FO was in a much better position at the beginning because it was automatically taken care of.
And then is there anything, this is for both of you, is there anything else that you wish pilots understood better, that miscommunications or misunderstandings you see commonly that make your jobs harder, things that pilots can do to make your jobs easier, their own jobs safer, that you wish they understood better about your respective safety committees?
I got 3 things I'll mention. First one is, if we're calling you, it's because the airplane recorded something that happened. If we're talking about some type of exceedance, it happens. It's not a subjective thing. It's hard data that the airplane recorded. There was, like if it's an airspeed thing, it was displayed on, both sides. So it's not very useful to have a conversation about whether or not the event is valid. It's because it happened. The second thing I would say, and I deliberately try to bring this up in the beginning of any crew contact, is, it's anonymous, like we talked about already. It's voluntary, and you cannot be punished because of talking to a gatekeeper. I usually ask people up front, like, hey, how familiar are you with the program? Do you understand that those provisions are in place? Some people are like, yeah, I get it. But then at the end, they're like, okay, so what happens next? Nothing. Nothing happens next. We're done talking about it. And then the third thing I would say, it's less of what I feel understand. When we make a crew contact, like you're getting a phone call from a random number. I know about, hey, most people don't answer calls from random numbers anymore. But for me personally, and I'm pretty sure most of the gatekeepers do that, I'll always leave you a voicemail. And I'm going to very quickly follow up my phone call with a text message. So if you see one of those, if you see like the phone call come in from the random number and then voicemails talk about Alpha, FOQA, Gatekeeper, stuff like that, and then you see a text message with that, if you could call us back, like as soon as you have the time to do it, that's super helpful.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I always try to leave voicemails, and on the flip side, I always encourage people to call the committee members, especially with ASAP, with the questions. Hey, is this a report? What do I do with this? What do I need to put in this report? Please reach out to committee members. That's what we're here for.
Right.
But when you do so, please also leave a voicemail or text me, because we do get random calls. So it's always good practice. Hey, shoot me a text, leave me a voicemail if I don't answer, and I promise you I will get back to you as soon as I have time to do it. But please do reach out and utilize that. Secondly, I would say one of the big things I want to know is, again, alongside FOQA, we do have a little bit more follow-up procedure with corrective actions, but none of it is punitive. It's not punitive. We have actually, to go to the very extreme of putting people in a simulator again because of something that occurred on the line. Again, it's fully protected. It's within the ASAP program. We try to limit exposure. There's non-disclosure agreements involved, all that kind of stuff. What we're trying to do is ensure the safety of the airline and its passengers and the betterment of the pilot group. So again, when we call you, we are not calling you to get mad at you, to tell you you're bad at your job or anything like that. We are trying to help out and do what we can. Obviously, people are going to have reactions that are differential, but that's another major thing. And 3, the biggest thing is that, again, please just report, file the reports, file the required reports and things like that, because you will end up being a better pilot because it will make you read the manuals and understand better things. A lot of what we see is because people just don't know what our procedures are, especially currently. For the example, landing configuration. I'm sure folks was getting a lot of late configuration issues because people don't understand the difference between configuration and stability, which is differential in our manuals. It's configured by 1,000 no matter what type of approach you're on. It's not by 500. It doesn't matter. You can't put flaps out below 1,000. That kind of stuff. So reading the manuals, filing the reports, a lot of times we do get positive aspects of that. So please do it, file the reports, and also research the manual. When you're filing the report, go to the section of the manual that deals with it. You may figure out what occurred, and you're going to be better off anyway. So that's
And then as an example of, why these programs are useful, like that specific conversation about, okay, you got to be configured at 1,000, if you're visual, you don't have to be stable to 500. The way that is written in the FOM is a little confusing. It could be written, I think, in a more obvious way that those are the requirements. The requirement to be configured at 1,000 is a sentence like buried in the middle of that paragraph, and then you have a nice table about the stable approach criteria at the bottom. So like, let's combine those things and make it easier. That's one of the things that's coming out of the work that's going on within FOQA and ASAP.
Agreed. And I've just gone through CQ for the first time last week, and we had a whole safety presentation, and one of the hot topics was late configuration, late flaps, what the stable approach means, all of that. But those topics bring me to my last question, which is, what are some of the specific airports and or scenarios where you're seeing a higher occurrence of ASAP FOQA events? What are some things that pilots need to be looking out for? What are some things that we need to be vigilant about to really focus our efforts on maintaining safety? Roanoke?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to, at least for us, you want to dumb it down to a single airport where stuff occurs, both on the approach end and the departure. We saw a large majority of actual pilot deviations filed on departures out of Roanoke because of what the airplane was doing, or perhaps it was slightly incorrectly configured in the box.
Okay.
Which is why that FIL came out about adding the gap or leaving the no link on the Dixie so the airplane doesn't turn. That was directly out of ASAP reports and pilot deviation. And probably some FOQA events as well in Roanoke. But the major thing I would say is, alongside the stability, is command heading issues. We see a lot of ASAPs on command heading issues, which is also where a lot of our deviations on takeoff come from, because the box is still in command heading. I don't think people understand. You can delete a flight plan from that box and it will remain in command heading.
Yes.
So
I've heard of it. I've not had it happen to me firsthand,
again,
thankfully.
The FIL on leaving with SIDS, where you verify procedure heading and first kicks and everything like that, that's out of those ASAP reports.
Got it.
And also just making sure you sequence the box properly on an RNAV. Because the reason it's in command heading, probably because it wasn't done properly, wasn't intercepted or something like that. So just being aware of that. Those are kind of the three right now that we're seeing a lot of.
Good to know.
I would say from FOQA, make sure you do the flow and the checklist. That's the biggest one that I could pass on. Do that checklist. It'll catch the vast majority of the stuff that people are getting. They're getting phone calls for.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Yeah, that's a big one.
All reasonable advice.
Yeah, with Roanoke, ASAP comment would be situational awareness. Be aware of where you are, where the terrain is, and things like that. That's really what it is.
Makes sense. All right, gentlemen. Well, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, Ben Montgomery from the FOQA Committee and Martin Ebert of ASAP. Appreciate you guys taking the time today to join us, and for all of the time and effort you put in on a regular basis to keeping these programs up and running and keeping our pilots and our aircraft and our passengers safe and operating safely consistently. So thank you very much, and we will hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much.